Welcome back to another segment of License to Legacy. I'm host Javi Trujillo, and joining me once again is Mr. David Leigh from the James Bond Dossier. How do you do, David?
Hi, Javi.
And of course, we have Bill Koenig of the Spy Command here as well. How are you today, Bill?
Okay, I had to dig out again from snow. Last two recordings we've done, there's been snow on the grounds.
Meanwhile, I'm in 70 degrees here in Texas wearing shorts, and that's 22 for those who go by centigrade. So it's really hard to get into the holiday spirit, even with all our Christmas decorations, when it's so hot outside. But what are you going to do? However, we're not here to talk about the weather. We are here to discuss the 30th anniversary of Goldeneye, perhaps one of the most important Bond films, certainly in my generation. Goldeneye opened in wide release in the US on November 17th, 1995, following its New York premiere on the 13th. As for the UK, its London premiere was the 21st of November, opening on the 24th. And I just want to make a quick side note that the video release of Goldeneye was almost a year later, October 29th, 1996. And just thinking back about it now, like, I just remember how agonizing that wait was. I think when Goldeneye came out, I was working at a movie theater. And by the time it came out on video, I was working at a video store instead, and just waiting and waiting and waiting to see the movie again. Like, we had a screener copy, which I still have. It's an advanced copy they give the video store owners so they can watch it and decide how many copies they want to buy. So I still have that in my collection. I just recently got it back from my parents' house, actually. And
yeah, well, that's a bit of a strategic employment, isn't it?
Yeah. And yeah, it was really fortuitous because I had connections. So I was able to get theatrical one sheets for the film itself and then for the home video release. But just thinking about it now, like how there's like this 45-day window between theatrical to streaming or, to home video release, it's crazy to think I had to wait almost a year to see it again and to see that gun barrel and to own it on Laserdisc, which that's a lifetime ago. And now that we're on 4K. But Goldeneye had an estimated like $50 to $60 million budget, which was the highest budget for this franchise at the time.
The original budget was $49 million. That's according to Jeff Kleinman, who was a studio executive. It ended up coming in at like 56. That's according to an interview Kleinman did with the Spy Hards podcast. But
which, again, to point out, like we just talked about Spectre, which had, allegedly around a $200 million budget. So just in the time from 1995 to 2015, how much that ballooned. It's remarkable to think about it. But it grossed $106 million in North America and $356 million worldwide, according to the numbers.com. So I find this interesting. If you go to that website, it's 9th unadjusted in the US and 8th worldwide. But then if you adjust it for inflation, it changes the rankings, and it's 16th for Bond movies in the US and 15th worldwide. That's like the back half of the pack. And among Pierce's other Bonds, it's the lowest grossing in the US, but the second highest for him worldwide. And even funnier is it's right behind Die Another Day, which, we all know that constantly gets derided as one of the worst movies. And box office isn't reflective necessarily what one calls quality cinema, but I find it interesting nonetheless that for this community, how a lot of people seem to knock Die Another Day. When it comes to the general audience, that seemed to be one that they really embraced. You have any thoughts on that?
I was going to say, again, I'll cite Jeff Kleinman's comments. He was talking in that interview. He said that even in those days, 30 years ago, a big action movie would get $100 million budget. So yeah, by that standard, Goldeneye was a lean production. And which is probably good, that probably forced the filmmakers to be more inventive than just throw money at problems.
It doesn't look like a lean production by any stretch. Like there's a lot of value, which, goes back to Eon's put every penny on the screen.
Well, it was also the final film for Derek Meddings, who had been away from the series for a while.
Yeah.
And they leaned pretty heavy on him, for, his miniatures, to stretch the budget.
Yeah. And in fact, like he had cancer at the time and passed away before the movie was released. So it's dedicated to him. But to think that he did, all that work dealing with the health issues he was having, like it's remarkable. And it wasn't something I noticed until, multiple repeat viewings after higher and higher definitions. Like, oh, that's a model shot. And that's a model shot. Even like the Tiger helicopter landing at Severnaya is a model shot. And I wouldn't have guessed. So, and
it's
just for
certainly not the first time you see it in the theater.
Yeah. And I just want to note, for additional context, worldwide, Goldeneye was the 7th highest grossing movie of 1995. So behind movies like Toy Story, Apollo 13, and Batman Forever. So that is the context for where Bond reappears after that 6-year gap. So as usual on License to Legacy, I want to ask you guys, when did you first see it? And what was like the mood or the hype level for you leading up to it? Bill, I want to start with you because you were there at these conventions leading up to the movie.
I saw it, I think it was the Tuesday night before its formal opening, because I was working at the Indianapolis Star newspaper and our film critic could not make the showing. It wasn't a press showing per se. What it was, they gave out all these free tickets, and that's where the local movie critics went. And she said she couldn't make it, gave me the free showing ticket, said be sure to get there early because it's first come, first serve when it comes to seats. So I went and I watched it, and I had a reporter's notepad and I was taking notes in the dark.
Well, that's a result.
Yeah. And when I got home, I wrote up my review while it was all fresh in my mind because I wanted to get it so they could edit it on Wednesday so it could be in the Thursday morning paper. That's typically when the movie reviews came out for movies opening on a Friday. So yes, I got to do an actual review that was published. The paper had a 4-star system. I gave it 3.5. Maybe I was a little generous, but I was just going strictly with, first reaction. So, and then I saw it.
Has that been digitized at all? Like, can we find that online, that old review of yours?
I don't know. Because that's when the internet was just gearing up. But I don't know if.
Yeah, I reckon if we were able to zoom out now, we would see it framed on his wall.
I have the clip somewhere in my clip file, but...
well, close.
Yeah.
Tell us about those conventions that were leading up to GoldenEye's release, Bill. I know you wanted to mention those.
Right. In October of 94, there was the first ever Eon-sanctioned fan convention. Originally, Roger Moore was to be there, but what happened was they were going to give Cubby Broccoli an award. They were going to call it the Goldeneye Award. But Cubby's health precluded him from making a personal appearance, so Sir Roger canceled out. George Lazenby was there, however, and a number of Bond actresses were there, as were Peter Hunt, editor of the early Bond films, plus being director of On Her Majesty's Secret Service, and John Steers, who did a lot of special effects work in the early Bond movies. So it was very interesting. And the idea was they're trying to get the fandom going again after that long hiatus. And then a little over a year later, in early November of 95, they had another one. The first one was in Los Angeles. The second one was in New York a few days before the opening. And Pierce Brosnan was there. And various members of the cast. It was the one time I had a chance to ask a question of Michael G. Wilson because they had to change up the schedule. So Michael G. Wilson, Bruce Fairstein came out to answer questions from the audience. The question I asked of Wilson was, in the summer of 95, Donald Westlake made an appearance at Ball State University in Muncie, Indiana. And he did an interview with a columnist for the newspaper, and Westlake saying, I'm going to write the next James Bond movie. No, not the one coming out this fall, the one after that. And he's given a few details. So it's like, this is the first I'd heard of this. So a few months later, I get in line and I ask Wilson, Donald Westlake says he's writing the next movie. Can you tell us anything about that? And before Wilson could answer, Fairstein, standing next to him, looked at Wilson and said, he is? Because, of course, by then, they've already made arrangements for Fairstein to start working on the next film, which would be Tomorrow Never Dies. Wilson cut, well, we've talked to Donald. He's someone we might want to have as a writer on a Bond movie someday. It's like, okay, fine. So it was just an amusing moment.
What did that do for your anticipation for the film?
Oh, it succeeded in stoking me up because, it was, and there were other things going on to get you hyped up for it. In the fall of 1994 at an Indiana University football game, the marching band played a medley of James Bond songs. And I remember the public address announcer in introducing it said, James Bond is about to return, is going to return soon, words to that effect. And then later, after those conventions, after the 95 convention, before the 95 convention, in I think May of 95, the David Letterman Late Night Show did a week of programs from London. And Pierce Brosnan was a guest on one of them. And so he's walking and he encounters a series of models who are like holding a tray, each with a single supposed to be a single martini. And he's like taking a sip one, then he walks to another. So he walks by about, 3 or 4 models on his way to talk to Letterman. Yeah, and like I said, this is the only time, these two conventions, the only time Eon ever participated. And I think it was because they knew they had to get everybody excited again, and they were willing to do that, but they never did again.
David, what are your memories from 95? When did you first see it? How excited were you to have Bond back on the big screen?
Yeah, well, I can kind of remember the build up to it. I do remember going to see it, although I'm not exactly sure how long it had been open before I did go to the cinema. But I remember the build up with, there was Michael G. Wilson saying, it's a different Bond from before. It's post Cold War, and there are less gadgets and all this kind of thing. So he had really thought that Bond was over after License to Kill. So when I started to see some of the promotional material on TV, I was like, okay, no, there is another Bond. And I did get quite excited about that. Yeah, I did.
I remember that announcement from June of him being the next Bond and just being really excited that, he was coming, that Bond was coming back. And even though he had longer hair and he had a beard, I think he was filming Robinson Crusoe at the time, and then going into Detonator 2, which I got a poster up from the video store, where they're trying to lean into, the Bond connection, even though he didn't look very Bondish. But I just remember being extremely excited for it and going back, and re-renting all the movies. I've talked about this on another episode, but checking them out, rediscovering them, basically having been a fan, but having not watched them a while and not owning any of them, having to go to a video store. There was one that was inside our grocery store, and I could check them out. They were the old ones that had the Pink Panther shorts at the beginning. But watching them through that and just getting more and more excited. And by that point, when 95 came around, I was working at the El Dorado Cinema, part of the Cineplex Odeon chain, which is gone in North America, or at least in the United States now. I think they merged with United Artists at some point. But I was working at the cinema. My friend was an assistant manager, and he called me down. He's like, I need you to come meet me in Theater 1. I'm like, okay. And so, we walked in and that trailer came on, and just the second that the Bond notes hit, it was electric, literally the hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and you get, it's a new world order, new threats, new enemies, but there's still one man, and then you have Pierce show up, and you're expecting someone else, and which just, it plays so beautifully because it's the double entendre of one, you expect someone other than James Bond, or Timothy Dalton to Pierce, and just going into the images and the electric guitar and the new arrangement for the Bond theme for that, like it was electrifying. And that's like that's a sensation that I get every time I see a new Bond trailer now to this day, 30 years later. And I was beyond hyped for it. And by the time Goldeneye came out, I was no longer working at that cinema. I was working at the video store. But the owners, it was a private video store because we had to deal with the radio station. I think they were able to get me tickets to an advanced like press screening like Bill. So it was at my old job at the old theater, and my best friend and I sat in the very front row, and just seeing that gun barrel for the first time with the weird noises and the clangs and how polished it looked, it blew me away because I was 18 at that point, and I was beside myself. It was quite the experience. Kind of know the answer to this, but how often do you rewatch this, David? I know you've had a hard time getting to rewatch the ones you like to watch. How often is this in your queue?
To be honest, none of the Brosnan ones really gets played that frequently. Although I do remember years ago, I had a copy of it, and it had multiple languages on there, including Spanish, and so I was trying to improve my Spanish, and so I watched it several times in English with Spanish subtitles, in Spanish with English subtitles, and probably in Spanish with Spanish subtitles, and just every combination apart from watching it straight. So I don't know if it actually helped, but there you go.
I like that. Watch Goldeneye, learn a new language. That's something to think about with all these options we have nowadays with different subtitles and captions. Like, that's a fun way to learn certain phrases. What about you, Bill?
Yeah, actually, there's something interesting about that. And it's not the only Bond film I did this to, and it may not actually occur in Goldeneye, but I found out that in Spanish, they say stirred, not shaken. They've got it the wrong way around. Yeah. I don't know if they've corrected that in the more recent films, but it was weird.
Yeah, and it's one of those differences. I don't know if this is the reason why, but in English we say the red car, and for Spanish it would be el coche rojo. So yeah, I wonder if that had part to do with it, or just something got lost in the translation. Maybe whoever did it. It's
just somebody mistranslating it somewhere. Yeah.
Huh. How about you, Bill? When do you get around to it? How often?
I have not watched it lately. Of the Brosnans, for some reason, I have been more prone to watch The World Is Not Enough and even Die Another Day and Tomorrow Never Dies. For some reason, I have not watched Goldeneye as often.
So where do you rank it? Is it in your top, middle, or bottom?
Maybe upper middle, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
On the cusp of upper, maybe. It's, as you said in the introduction, is certainly one of the most important films in the series. There was a lot riding on it because they were really only going to get one chance, because at the studio, there was very much mixed feelings. There were some people like Jeff Kleinman who very much wanted to get the series going again, but there were skeptics at the studio as well. And like I said earlier, they were fairly conservative on the budget. The studio was not wanting Timothy Dalton back. Eon did want him back, but Pierce Brosnan had his own issues in that he was most famous at that point for the Remington Steele TV show, which had been off the air for a number of years by that point. And, he wasn't a big movie star. I mean, he had been in movies like, Mrs. Doubtfire. But, it was not a sure thing. You mentioned the announcement in June of 94 that Brosnan got the part. The Wall Street Journal had a big story the day before on the front page, and it talked about other actors who had been considered, or, had turned it down or said they weren't interested. Liam Neeson was one of them. Ralph Fiennes was in the conversation, but it worked in the end, and it did get the series going again.
David, where does this one fall on your ranking of the 25 eons?
I don't really I don't really have a firm idea of where it goes. It's it's below the middle certainly, but I'm not exactly sure how low it actually goes. It gets a bit tricky down there. I think it's because I've got this funny relationship with the Brosnan era Bonds that I really like Pierce Brosnan as Bond. I think he was perfect at the time as Bond. And I think as an ambassador for Bond, he was, absolutely perfect in that role as well. But I think he really wasn't served very well by the material he was given to work with. And so all of the Brosnan Bonds, although I liked him, I just left the cinema feeling underwhelmed.
For myself, I feel like it's weird because I have this emotional attachment to the movie that the movie doesn't quite live up to those feelings. Like, in terms of like rewatching it, it's at this point, now that his tenure's over, it is, one of my least rewatched of his. I mean, it is my least rewatched of his, leading in the Brosnan era, like maybe Before the World Is Not Enough, it got a lot of play because, I had it on Laserdisc, like I said, and it was the new thing. And we would constantly show off our home theater with that tank chase. So I feel like it got a lot of play. And then as other movies came out, we got into the Craig era, I just never went back to it. And part of that too is just, I just didn't like how like the Lowry remaster made it look. Like didn't look as good. It looked weird to me compared to versions I was used to seeing. The score definitely had something to do with it also. And we'll get into the score in a minute, but it's not one that I go to fairly often. And only recently have I sat down and, watched it from start to finish. And that's because I got to see it last month or in October for part of the 30th anniversary. So that was the last time I watched it. But as for me, it's the bottom of the Pierces, probably in the middle of my ranking overall.
One other thing, the internet was just kind of getting going at this point, and there was this service called Prodigy, which I subscribed to, and it had message boards. And there was a guy who claimed to be working for the studio, but he didn't sign his name. But he went into like a lot of detail. He said Bruce Fairstein was like the last writer, and people at the studio were excited about the work he had done, kind of whipping it into shape. He talked about the difficulty they had with the end of the pre-titles because, they kept trying to have the stunt guy on the motorcycle try and catch the plane going off the cliff, and they couldn't pull it off. He talked about that. So I kind of concluded this is probably, I mean, it's not something I would quote unless I actually knew the guy's name. But there was but something else, again on Prodigy, there was a guy, turned out he was an associate producer on Columbo. And he was talking about Columbo. And he did sign his name. And I remember asking him, I said, "Are you the associate producer of Columbo?" Yeah, I am. So it's certainly possible that guy, talking about Goldeneye, was with the studio because just the level of detail he had, because pretty much everything he said turned out to be the case, once I saw the movie. It was an odd experience.
Yeah, I'll bet. And I mentioned in my recollection of it, like the gun barrel. Is this the last great gun barrel, at least from like a traditional sense? Because with the exception of Die Another Day, where they added in the CGI bullet, it's basically the same across all four of Brosnan's movies.
It is, while it had a different arrangement and different sound, it still had the da-da-da, da-da-da, whereupon the first two Arnold movies didn't have that. It was just kind of, it was kind of like The Spy Who Loved Me, where you didn't have that, whatever you want to call it, staccato, whatever. And then finally with Die Another Day, Arnold did do that. But then there was the CGI bullet, but that's not Arnold's doing. But yeah, it was interesting. It was interesting.
I mean, they definitely nailed it from like the perspective of, Brosnan looked good. He moved well. There was no, silliness about it, or at least from like his walk, like nothing to try and make it unique. It was just Bond in a tux, which we were used to at that point once we moved out of the Connery era. And really the only thing that freshened it up was how they portrayed the gun barrel itself. Any thoughts on that, David?
I would have to go and look at the gun barrel, and I don't remember it in any detail, so no.
Now, the dam jump has become a legendary stunt, turning the side of the Verzaska Dam in Ticino, Switzerland into a tourist attraction that is visited the world over, allowing you to reenact the daring bungee jump. It even has the world record of, quote, the highest bungee jump from a structure in a film, measuring at a drop of over 220 meters or, 759 feet. Have either of you been there, and how did it set the bar for pre-title sequences going forward?
I haven't been there, and if I did go there, I wouldn't do the jump. And to me, I thought it wasn't really the kind of thing that I want to see in a Bond film, to be honest. It's a bit too over the top. I'd have preferred him to infiltrate the base in some other way. I thought it instantly put me off Goldeneye.
Hot take from David. Bill, what do you think of it?
Well, I've not been there either, and I would not do the jump if I had been. One thing about that jump is they barely made it, in the sense that of because at one point when he starts to hit the bottom of the it's like the stuntman is like kind of whipped around, and like he barely gets the gun out while the camera's still rolling. It's certainly an amazing stunt. I give it to that. You have to give it that.
Yeah, no doubt about that.
I guess when I watched it, I really didn't evaluate it versus other stunts. It did strike me. They were wanting to do something to get your attention right off the bat. And it certainly succeeded. It's like with succeeding films, you can kind of go back, well, was it that great? In terms of dramatic sense, because, I think they kind of cut it short in the sense of when Bond goes to prepare for the jump, there was more footage. They shot more footage.
That is on the DVD. One of the box sets has that.
Yeah. So I did think right afterwards, Bond catches a Russian soldier in the toilet.
Yeah.
And it's like, that was kind of like, I don't know, that's maybe like too much humor. They were flirting with it, but it didn't ruin it for me. But it just, I don't know, having a guy sitting on a toilet isn't that.
Yeah, Martin Campbell was very proud of that, though, for some reason. Yeah, for me, it's that isn't what I want to see in a Bond film either. You wouldn't get that in a Sean Connery movie.
It is an odd juxtaposition to go from that stunt to, that steely close up of his eyes as he's cutting his hole into the bottom of the dam to get in. And then the first time we see him, he's upside down in the loo. So we go from like a serious Connery to like almost a Moorish moment.
Maybe it's not that much of a juxtaposition, though, because if I knew that I had to do that stunt, I'd need the toilet too.
Starting with the Living Daylights, for some reason, Eon was fond of filming scenes in bathrooms.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah, introduce Bond in the bathroom. So is that what we can expect from Amazon as well? No,
I hope not.
For a first close-up, Timothy Dalton's was definitely more dignified. I'll say that.
Yeah, to reinforce David's point, to quote Jose Jimenez, I hope not. But
We'll see.
I myself have not been to the dam. I would not be able to do that jump. I think I'm a little too big for the weight limit, but I would be tempted, but even though it's not really my thing. But from my perspective, like that, this was on par with like the Spy Who Loved Me parachute jump. You know, just something crazy and out there, maybe without the patriotism of that stunt. But I thought it was...
The Spy Who Loved Me worked, but that's because I was like 12 years old or something.
Yeah. Just seeing it again too on, you know, at the cinema where it's so big and that fall just seems like forever. It feels so much more impressive than, you know, watching it on your television at home. I think it definitely, I mean, it was used in all the marketing and you can even do it in the video game. And I kind of feel like they were trying to capture the spectacle, you know, going forward. So let's talk about the music for a second here. You know, while the theme song by Tina Turner is revered, the score by Eric Serra is not. David, how do you like the score, and did its reception play a factor in the hiring of David Arnold on the next film?
Did it play a factor in David Arnold getting the job? I don't know, actually. That's I hadn't really thought about that. But yeah, it's not exactly classic Bond. Probably they wanted to push the music in a different direction from what had gone before, but you know, it seems a bit too un-Bond-like as a result, I think. I'm not a fan.
Bill, what are your thoughts on the music? Would you buy a La La Land release if they put it out?
Sure. I mean, I've got I have a CD of the soundtrack, the original CD.
Same.
You know, they apparently had second thoughts because they hired John Altman to do a more traditional Bond-sounding piece of music for the tank chase. Whereupon on the CD soundtrack, they have Sarah's original tank chase music, and so you can tell how different it was from what ended up being in the movie. Yeah, I mean, although I saw an interview once with David Arnold where he complimented Sarah. I think they were trying to make a more modern Bond movie. The camera movements by, you know, under Campbell's direction, there's more camera movement than you had under John Glenn, for example. Glenn had a more of a stationary camera. That's what leapt out at me as I'm taking notes to write a review in the pre-titles, where, you know, the camera's moving around a fair amount. It's like where all those soldiers are coming in to get after Bond. In general, I think they were trying to, you know, update it. So that's probably why Sarah got the job. And then I think they had second thoughts because originally with Tomorrow Never Dies, they did make an attempt. Well, can we get John Barry to come back for one more? And they apparently talked a fair amount, and just for various reasons, it just didn't happen. So then they reached out to David Arnold, who had a very Barry sounding score for that movie. It was updated somewhat, but yeah, he definitely wanted to emulate Barry. So, and he ended up having the job for a few movies.
I'm going to say, I've seen, trying to think, Eric Serra, I know from his partnership with director Luc Besson. So I'd seen The Professional, which came out the year before, Leon for the Rest of the World. And he also went on to do The Fifth Element, which is another soundtrack that I really love. But his Goldeneye, it definitely made it feel maybe more contemporary, at least compared to what we'd had before. But that was maybe more of a product of the equipment they had to record it and how we could listen to it, you know, cassette versus CD. But his score just never really sounded Bondian to me as I came to understand it. It feels more European, if that makes sense. And you can definitely, if you compare his other music at the time from that decade with Goldeneye, you see all the commonalities with the drums and the bells, and there's a lot of similarities in electronic sounds. Like there's a through line between Leon the Professional, Goldeneye, and The Fifth Element, where the beginning of The Professional sounds very similar to Goldeneye. At the end of the film, there's a character moment where the notes from The Experience of Love, which is the Bond end title song are played. So, I mean, that was something I caught, a few years after the fact. I'm like, wait a minute, that's the same song. So on one hand, it doesn't feel Bondian, but on the other hand, because it's so weird and unique and was definitely an influence on the video game, which I played constantly back then, I don't know, there's a weird, I feel like two ways about it, because it is so of this movie, therefore it's a Bond soundtrack, but it doesn't have that Barry sound, so it doesn't feel like cohesive, like it belongs, if that makes any sense.
Well, just a bit of trivia. 3 years later, 1998, the Winter Olympics were held in Japan, and they were broadcast in the United States by CBS, and they had some kind of preview show. And so the host is talking, and they played some of Sarah's Goldeneye score in the background. I mean, I recognized it instantly.
Yeah.
Presumably they licensed it. Yeah, it was interesting. So it lived on beyond the movie.
Yeah, it even got cut into movie trailers, because I remember the trailer for LA Confidential, in the back half, it has some of Sarah's music. And the first time I saw that, I'm like, that's the Goldeneye music. That's not from LA Confidential. And I feel like you mentioned the Ottman rescoring the tank chase scene. Because of that gap between theatrical and home video, there was a moment in time where I didn't recognize that the song on the soundtrack wasn't the same one in the movie, like I'd forgotten. And I kind of like the omitted Sarah thing. It's kind of jaunty, it's fun, it's quirky. It does have the Bond theme in it, just in a different arrangement and with, different music or different instruments. So it's not that brassy sound, but I think because of it too, like by the time Tomorrow Never Dies came out, and I think Eon probably knew, but again, because one, they already hired someone to kind of come in and make it sound more Bondian. But to go with Arnold was like the clear choice, because he's so very influenced, and that just made Tomorrow Never Dies for me like that much of a sweeter experience every time you got like Goldfinger cues woven in, or later on when he uses some Thunderball and like Die Another Day. Like having a fan of the original films do the music made a tremendous impact on my viewing experience, because of, what happened with Goldeneye, that when we got these more Barry-esque sounds, like it really emphasized how much I enjoyed that music and how it wove in with the other movies. So I think it's one of those things, right? Like if we didn't have Eric Serra, we may not have gotten David Arnold. And before we close out this chapter of License to Legacy, I want to talk about Daniel Kleinman really quick. Goldeneye marked the first of 8 main titles by him. How did he push the concept forward that Maurice Binder had helped innovate in Robert Brownjohn through the 90s and into the 21st century? And do you have a favorite main title sequence done by him?
Well, Kleinman had directed the music video for License to Kill, and Barbara Broccoli, who at the time was associate producer, lobbied for him to replace Binder, but Cubby Broccoli vetoed that. So, but that kind of established his place in line, because Binder had passed away between License to Kill and Goldeneye. It was Binder-esque without copying, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
It had a lot of the same tropes, but it was his spin on it. You had more computer-generated images. I like his "For the World Is Not Enough" because it had your traditional nude silhouettes, but it actually incorporated oil as part of which was a key part of the plot.
Yeah, that's
the film, and also you had the injured Bond kind of falling into Kleinman world in the main titles. So I mean, he was a good choice. I mean, he's done them all with the exception of Quantum of Solace, which was by MK12 or
Mark 12.
Mark 12,
Forster's people.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, his work's been a highlight of both the Brosnan and Craig movies. Pretty much.
David, how do you like Kleinman?
Well, I think one of the things that I noticed about Goldeneye was that the titles had definitely changed, and it was a much more modern take on what we had been used to up until to that point. I think they're okay they've always done the job. I think they don't have the same impact as the Maurice Binder titles, but that's because I'd seen all the Maurice Binder titles, so it's as simple as that. I don't know how I would have accepted them or what I would really have thought about them if Goldeneye had been my first Bond, which is it's a very, very different perspective. So I don't have anything against them, I guess is the main thing. They do the job as well as they need to do the job.
Do you think they should have used more black? So I think of like Binder's work, there's a lot of like black backgrounds that images, pop up in front of. Would that have made it feel more Binder-esque?
Well, I don't know. I think that is interesting. I think they're a lot busier than Binder's titles, really, because I guess because of the access to computer graphics. But
yeah,
I don't think that really makes that much of a difference. Probably if I saw Goldeneye as my first Bond or any of the recent Bonds as my first experience of that kind of thing, then I would be awestruck by them. But I'd never seen anything like the titles for Dr. No. My first Bond was The Man with the Golden Gun. I'd never seen anything like that. And then after that, Dr. No on the small screen, and I was just mesmerized by that. And so after that, no title sequence is ever going to have the same impact.
Kleinman does seem to want to incorporate the plot of the film into his titles. In Goldeneye, you have this, it's the post-Cold War, and you have these fallen Soviet statues and memorials, whatever. The women, the nude women are like taking mallets and smashing them to pieces.
Yeah.
So I mean, I guess that's kind of Kleinman's main contribution to his titles. His Casino Royale title really went into the whole thing with playing cards. Skyfall really got into Bond's past and with the titles for that. So that I think is probably his main contribution to the series.
They're definitely more thematically appropriate than not that Binder didn't take elements from the movies and incorporate them into it, but thinking of like You Only Live Twice or any of his other work. View to a Kill, they had people on skis, which ties in with the opening a little bit, but definitely more story based, I would say. And like for me, like standouts are like the ones you mentioned, Bill. Goldeneye, The World Is Not Enough, Casino Royale, and Skyfall are some of my favorite pre-title sequences that I like to just watch on their own. So
that 1995 fan convention that a few days before the movie opened, one of the parts of the program was they did show the titles for Goldeneye. Thing was, it was on big screen. The resolution wasn't as good, not as good as you'd see in a movie theater, but you could tell what was going on. So
there definitely is. You could definitely, back in '95, you could definitely tell the modernity of it. How we'd made that leap in that 6 years time of, like you said, incorporating like computerized graphics into the look itself, because so much of what Binder did was in camera and then composited later. And now we had all these CG elements being woven into it. So it definitely brought it back up to modern sensibilities. But that is going to do it for part one of our License to Legacy Goldeneye 30th anniversary conversation. Bill, where can people find you?
I'm at the Spy Command, hmssweblog.wordpress.com. And I have some other sites that are, you can find them on the left side of the Spy Command page.
And David, how about yourself?
You can find me at www.thejamesbonddossier.com.
As for myself, I am The Bond Is Not Enough on Instagram. And if you go to the James Bond Dossier right now, I've got a written review of the James Bond Lover's Guide to Britain. We just had an interview with the author on the site as well, so you can listen to that, or you can go to the website and read my thoughts on the book. But it's really fun and a great stocking stuffer for Christmas or birthday or whenever.
Absolutely.
So thank you for listening, and the 007 files will return.